He left his phone on the kitchen counter on Thanksgiving night, and that small, careless mistake cost him everything. Vincent Moretti had spent 15 years building an empire no one could touch. He had survived federal investigations, rival families, and enemies who disappeared quietly into the Hudson. He had outmaneuvered men twice his age and buried secrets deep enough to never surface. But on a cold November evening, with turkey still warm in the oven and candles burning low on the dining table, the most dangerous man in New York City forgot his phone. His pregnant wife found it, and by morning, she was gone. If you have ever trusted someone completely, given them your whole life, your body, your future, and then discovered in a single moment that everything was a calculated lie, you know there is a specific kind of pain that does not make you cry. It makes you go very, very still. This is Evelyn's story, and it will shake you to your core. If this story already has your heart pounding, please hit that like button right now and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next, because the stories on this channel do not end where you expect them to. Now, let's begin. The turkey had been in the oven since 2 in the afternoon. Evelyn Whitmore Moretti had been on her feet since 11, and by 6 o'clock her lower back was sending sharp little warnings she tried to ignore. She was 28 years old, 6 months pregnant, and had spent the better part of Thanksgiving week arranging a dinner that Vincent had said he wanted to be perfect. His words. Perfect. A real family holiday. Just the two of them this year, before the baby came and everything changed. She had taken that seriously. She always took what Vincent said seriously. The apartment was warm, the kind of forced, artificial warmth that came from underfloor heating and closed windows high above the city, where the wind off the Hudson had no business being let inside. The penthouse sat on the 43rd floor of a building that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. From the living room windows, the Manhattan skyline spread in every direction like something out of a movie. Bridges lit up orange, the river dark and moving below, the city making its constant low sound that you stopped hearing after a while. Evelyn had stopped hearing it months ago. She had grown up with money, but not this kind of money. Her father, Richard Whitmore, had been wealthy in the old-fashioned sense. Property, investments, careful accumulation over decades. The Moretti world was different. It was faster. It was louder. It was hotels and jets, and people who called Vincent at strange hours and never left their names. She had told herself it was the nature of international business. She had believed him when he explained it that way. She had believed a lot of things. She set the table the way Vincent liked it, cloth napkins folded into points, crystal glasses. His mother had brought from Italy before she died. The good silverware that lived in a velvet-lined box in the butler's pantry and only came out 3 or 4 times a year. She lit the candles herself and stepped back and looked at it, and for one moment she felt genuinely proud of what she had made. A real table, a real dinner, a real life. She pressed her hand to the side of her stomach, and the baby shifted slightly, and she smiled. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. Running 10 minutes behind. Don't wait on me. She texted back. Okay. Drive safe. She sat down at the table and waited anyway. He walked in at 7:15, still in his coat, smelling like cold air, and the particular cedar and leather scent of his car. He kissed her on the cheek, not her mouth, and said the apartment looked great. He said it the way people say the weather is nice, automatically, without really seeing it. He sat down across from her, poured himself a glass of wine, and picked up his fork. They ate. The conversation was the kind that happens between two people who have gotten comfortable enough with silence that they only fill it occasionally. Vincent asked about her last doctor's appointment. She told him the baby was fine, weight was good, everything on schedule. He nodded and cut his turkey and said that was good to hear. She asked about his trip to Chicago the previous week. He said it was routine. She asked about the issue he had mentioned with the Docklands property. He said it was being handled. She watched him while he ate, the way you watch someone when you're trying to figure out if something is different and you can't quite name what it is. Vincent was not a man who showed stress. I was 51 years old and had the kind of face that had learned, over many decades and many difficult rooms, to reveal absolutely nothing. Gray at the temples now, jaw still clean, eyes dark and controlled. He looked like a man who was accustomed to the world adjusting itself to his preferences. She had found that quality magnetic when they first met. It had started to feel like something else recently, though she couldn't have said what. At 8:40, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it and something moved across his face. Quick, gone, before she could name it. "1 second," he said. He stepped away from the table. She heard him in the hallway, his voice dropping to something low and clipped, the way it always did when he was talking business. She refilled her water glass and ate the last of her cranberry sauce and tried not to feel the small, familiar twist of resentment that came from being left mid-dinner for a phone call. Again. He came back 4 minutes later. "I have to go," he said. She looked up at him. "Now?" "There's a situation with one of the Rotterdam accounts. My CFO can't reach the bank contact without me on the call." He was already moving toward the bedroom. She heard the closet open, heard the rustle of his coat being replaced with the heavier overcoat. "It'll take a few hours. I'll be back before midnight." "Vincent?" She kept her voice level. "It's Thanksgiving." "I know." He came back to the doorway and his expression was apologetic in the way that powerful men are apologetic, sincere looking on the surface, but underneath it was just impatience wearing a better face. "I'm sorry, Ev. I wouldn't leave if it wasn't necessary." She looked at him for a moment. The table behind her still had 2 half-finished plates on it, candles burning down, the effort of the whole day visible and now irrelevant. "Okay," she said. He kissed her forehead, said he would make it up to her, said she should rest and not stay up too late, said he loved her. Then he was gone. She sat at the table alone for a few minutes, listening to the apartment settle into quiet. Then she started clearing the dishes. She wrapped the leftovers methodically, stacked plates in the sink, blew out the candles. The baby shifted again, and she pressed her hand flat against her ribs and breathed. She was reaching to wipe down the marble kitchen counter when she saw it. His phone. It was sitting face up next to the fruit bowl, plugged into the charger she had put there for him months ago because he always forgot to charge it. He had left it. In a rush, or distracted, he had walked out the door of a 43-floor penthouse on Thanksgiving night and left his phone on the kitchen counter like someone who had no reason to worry. She picked it up to set it aside. That was all she intended to do. But the screen lit in her hand, and she saw the notification banner before she could look away. Victoria. Tonight changes everything. Soon there will be nothing left connecting you to her. Evelyn stood very still. Her hand did not shake. She noticed that about herself later, that her hand did not shake. Her breathing went shallow and slow, but her hand was absolutely steady, holding the phone, looking at that message. Tonight changes everything. She had met Victoria Hale 3 times, a tall, contained woman in her mid-30s who worked as something like an international acquisitions consultant for the Moretti business portfolio. Sharp clothes, careful eyes. Vincent had introduced her at a company dinner 18 months ago as an essential part of the overseas expansion. Evelyn had shaken her hand and thought nothing of her. She had seemed professional. She had seemed like a person doing a job. Soon there will be nothing left connecting you to her. Evelyn set the phone back on the counter. She stood there for about 10 seconds, looking at the ceiling. Then she picked it up again. Vincent's phone had a 6-digit passcode. She had never asked for it, and he had never offered it, which had always seemed normal to her. Reasonable privacy between 2 adults. But she had watched him unlock it enough times that the pattern was somewhere in the back of her memory. She stood there and let that part of her mind work. Tried the first sequence that surfaced. It was wrong. She tried the second one, the month and year they had gotten engaged. The screen opened. For a moment she just held it in her hand, not moving. Part of her was already arguing with herself, the rational part that said she should put it down, that she had misread the message, that there was an explanation, that Victoria Hale was a business associate and that message had a context she was not aware of. That part of her was loud and insistent, and sounded very much like the voice she had been listening to for 2.5 years of marriage. She went to the messages. Victoria Hale's thread was near the top. It was long, very long. She scrolled up and the messages went back further than she could immediately absorb. The timestamps were damning before the content even registered. Late nights, early mornings, dozens of exchanges during weeks when Vincent had told her he was traveling and unreachable. Private meetings recorded in text. References to hotels she recognized. References to conversations that happened in places Evelyn had not been. She read slowly. She made herself read every line. By the time she reached the messages from 6 weeks ago, her body had gone very cold. Not the shaking kind of cold. The deep kind, the kind that starts in the chest and moves outward and makes your fingers feel strange and far away. There was a message from Victoria sent in late September. The timeline needs to move up. Once she's further along, it becomes more complicated. Vincent's response? We have time. The asset transfer takes another 60 days minimum. I'm not moving faster than the legal team can cover. Another from Victoria. What about her? Does she suspect anything? Vincent. No. She's focused on the pregnancy. She's not paying attention to anything else. Evelyn had to put the phone down. She set it flat on the counter and put both hands on the edge of the sink and looked at the dark window above it. Outside, the city was lit up and indifferent. 43 floors below, people were walking home from Thanksgiving dinners, taking taxis, arguing, laughing, living lives that were exactly what they appeared to be. She's not paying attention to anything else. She picked the phone back up. She went further. She went to the email app, then to a secondary email she had not known existed, accessed through a browser bookmark. Financial documents. Transfers she did not recognize between accounts she had never heard of. A legal brief from an attorney whose name was not among the Moretti family's known counsel, outlining the dissolution of a trust, the Whitmore-Moretti Joint Legacy Trust, which Evelyn knew existed because her father's estate attorney had mentioned it when she married. It had been structured to protect assets belonging to both family lines. The document outlined a process by which those protections could be voided, under a specific set of conditions, with specific witnesses. She read it 3 times. Then she found the audio file. It was stored in a folder titled with a date from 4 months ago and labeled with a string of numbers that meant nothing. She almost missed it, but something, the precise blankness of the label, made her tap it. Vincent's voice filled the kitchen at low volume, clear and unhurried. Transfer completes in the second quarter. The timing depends on the birth. We want the asset reallocation finished before any custody questions get complicated. A pause. Victoria's voice, smooth and deliberate. And Evelyn? Vincent. Once the baby is born, we finish the transfer. Evelyn and the child are complications we need to handle. We'll have everything we need by then. She won't have any legal standing left. Evelyn pressed stop. She stood in her kitchen on Thanksgiving night, 6 months pregnant, and she understood with complete clarity what the last 2.5 years of her life had actually been. Not a marriage, an acquisition. She had been the mechanism by which Vincent Moretti had gained access to the Whitmore family assets her father had structured so that only bloodline heirs and their legally recognized spouses could touch. Vincent had needed the marriage to get inside the walls. He had needed her to be trusting and quiet and focused on the pregnancy and not paying attention. He had been right about all of it, until tonight. She stood there for a long moment. The apartment hummed around her with its expensive silence. The candles on the dining table had burned themselves out. Somewhere below, the city went on. She looked at the phone in her hand. She thought about her father, Richard Whitmore, who had built something real and had trusted the wrong man with it, who had died 2 years ago believing the family was protected, who had squeezed her hand in the hospital and said, "Ev, you're smarter than you think you are. Don't forget that." She had not cried yet. She noticed that. She was not sure when she would. What she felt, beneath the cold and the shock and the particular devastation of having the entire architecture of your life collapse in under 30 minutes, was something she could not immediately name. It took her another minute to identify it. It was clarity. She opened her own email on her phone and found the contact she had not used in 2 years. The number she had saved under a false name, under her father's old instruction, "Keep this. You may never need it, but keep it." Adrian Callahan, her father's consigliere, the man who knew where all the real documents were buried. She typed one line. "I found it. I need help tonight." Then she went to the drawer where she kept her laptop charger and pulled out the small portable hard drive that she had bought 2 months ago for backing up her pregnancy photos and documents. And she began to copy everything. Her hands were steady the entire time. That was the thing she would remember afterward, through all of it. Her hands did not shake once. She copied the messages, the financial documents, the legal brief, the audio file. Every thread of evidence that Vincent had left accessible through a phone he had walked out of his own home and forgotten on Thanksgiving night, because he was so certain she wasn't paying attention that he had stopped being careful. That was his first mistake. Leaving had been his second. The hard drive clicked quietly as it filled. Outside, the city burned orange and cold against the dark sky. The Moretti penthouse sat 43 floors above Manhattan, expensive and still and completely unaware that the woman inside it had just become the most dangerous person in the building. Evelyn Whitmore sat at the kitchen counter with her father's daughter's mind working behind her eyes, and she made a list of everything she still needed to do before morning. There was more to find. She was certain of it, and she had the rest of the night. The hard drive finished copying at 11:47. Evelyn knew this because she had been watching the progress bar with the focused attention of someone who understood, on a cellular level, that the small device in her hand was the only thing standing between her and complete destruction. When the transfer completed and the light on the drive went from blinking orange to solid green, she pulled it from the laptop port, held it in her palm for a moment, and then pressed it flat against her sternum like it was something alive she was trying to keep warm. Then she put it in her bra, because that was where it was going to stay until she was somewhere safe. She stood up from the kitchen counter, and her back screamed at her. The deep, grinding ache that had become her constant companion in the 6th month, the kind that no position ever fully relieved. She ignored it. She had been ignoring her body for the last 2 hours, and she could keep ignoring it a little longer. She checked her phone. Adrian had not responded yet. She looked at the time and did the math. It was close to midnight on Thanksgiving. I was 71 years old and lived alone in Westchester and might be asleep. She typed the message again. Adrian, it's urgent. I need you to call me now. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went to the bedroom. She did not turn on the main light. She used the small lamp on her side of the bed. Her side, always her side. The left because Vincent slept on the right and had never once asked her which side she preferred. And she pulled her overnight bag from the back of the closet. The one she had packed 2 weeks ago for hospital readiness. Her doctor had told her to have it ready by week 26. She had been organized about it, methodical, the way she was about most things. Folded clothes, toiletries, the birth plan document, the folder with her insurance cards and medical records. She unzipped it and looked at what was inside and started making decisions. She took out 2 of the maternity shirts and replaced them with the folder of documents she had found in her father's lockbox 8 months ago. Documents she had brought to the penthouse intending to have them scanned and stored digitally, and then had simply kept in the nightstand drawer because there was always something more immediate demanding her attention. She had never looked at them closely. She understood now that her father had meant for her to. She added her own laptop, her external backup drive, the Whitmore family documents her father's estate lawyer had forwarded after the funeral, which she had filed in the bedroom closet behind a row of shoe boxes because Vincent had said the estate was handled and there was nothing she needed to do. She had trusted that. She had trusted all of it. The bag was heavy. She tested the weight and adjusted the strap and decided she could manage it. Her phone rang. She picked it up on the first ring. Adrian. Evelyn. His voice was rough with sleep but sharpening fast, the way old men who have lived through difficult things wake up. Not gradually, but all at once. What's happened? Not a question, a statement, which told her that somewhere in the back of Adrian Callahan's 71-year-old mind, he had been waiting for this call. I found evidence tonight, she said. Her voice was steady and low. She kept listening for the elevator. Vincent and Victoria Hale have been planning to strip the Whitmore Moretti Trust. There's a legal document already drafted. There's an audio recording of Vincent saying, she stopped, swallowed once. He said I won't have any legal standing left after the baby is born. He said the baby and I are complications that need to be handled. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Where are you now? Adrian said. The penthouse. He left tonight, said it was business. He doesn't know I found his phone. Does he know you know anything? No. Then you have time. She heard him moving, heard a door, heard what might have been a light switch. How far along is your hospital bag? She almost laughed. I'm standing in the bedroom holding it. Good girl. He said it without condescension, the way her father used to say it, like an acknowledgement of competence rather than a softening of her. Don't take anything that looks like you plan to leave. Take what looks medical. Take what looks like a nervous mother being careful. You understand? Yes. I'm sending a car. Blacktown car. Driver named Marcus. He'll text you from a number ending in 4471. Do not go down to the lobby. The service entrance on the northeast corner of the building. Do you know it? She knew it. She had used it once when a delivery went to the wrong door. Yes. Marcus will be there in 40 minutes. Be ready in 30. And Evelyn, I know, she said. Don't call anyone else. Don't call anyone else, he confirmed. Not a friend, not a doctor, not your cousin in Connecticut. No one. Not tonight. She hung up. She stood in the bedroom for a moment and looked at it. The oversized bed with its heavy linen, the framed photograph on Vincent's nightstand, the two of them at their wedding, Evelyn laughing at something just outside the frame, Vincent's hand at the small of her back. She had always loved that photo. She had thought it captured something real. She left it there. She did not take it down or turn it face first into the nightstand. She left it exactly where it was because she was thinking about what Adrian had said. Don't take anything that looks like you plan to leave. She went back to the kitchen and replaced Vincent's phone on the counter, face up, exactly where she had found it. She wiped it with the hem of her shirt to remove any fingerprints because she had seen enough crime dramas in her life to know that detail mattered, and she was not leaving anything to chance. She drank a glass of water standing over the sink, cold and slow. She pressed her hand against her stomach and felt the baby move again, sluggish and oceanic, the way he moved late at night when she was still and quiet. I know, she said to him. Not out loud, just in her chest, the way mothers talk to babies they haven't met yet. I know, we're leaving. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She took the elevator not to the lobby but to the parking sublevel, then walked the maintenance corridor to the northeast service door, following the mental map she had built in the 30 seconds she'd spent standing in the bedroom after Adrian's call. The cold hit her the moment she pushed the door open. Genuine November cold, the wet kind that came off the Hudson and had no interest in being polite about it. She pulled her coat tighter and stood in the narrow concrete passage between the building and the neighboring structure, and she waited. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number ending in 4471, 2 minutes. The town car appeared at the end of the passage exactly when Marcus said it would. He was a compact, quiet man in his late 50s who got out and took her bag without being asked, and opened the rear door and said nothing except, "Mr. Callahan is waiting." She got in. The car pulled away from the building and merged into the thin Thanksgiving night traffic, and Evelyn watched the penthouse tower shrink in the rear window until it disappeared behind the curve of the highway. She did not feel relief. She did not feel grief. What she felt was the particular exhaustion of having held her body at maximum tension for 3 hours, and beneath that, something harder and colder and more durable. She was 40 minutes from Westchester when Vincent came home. She knew because his name appeared on her phone's screen at 12:21. She watched it ring and did not answer. It stopped after 5 rings. Then a text. "Where are you? Are you okay?" She put the phone face down on the seat beside her. Marcus said nothing. He drove. The highway lights moved overhead in slow orange intervals. Her phone rang again at 12:30, then once more at 12:46. The third time she turned the ringer off entirely and stared out the window at the dark edges of the city, giving way to the darker edges of the county, the buildings thinning out, the sky getting wider and colder above the tree line. Adrian Callahan's estate sat at the end of a private road behind a gate that looked old but operated on sensors that were anything but. Marcus punched a code and the iron panels swung inward, and the car moved slowly up the gravel drive to a house that was large and old and lit from within, warm yellow light in the front windows. Adrian himself visible on the porch before the car had even stopped. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner. 71 years had not been unkind to him, but they had been honest. His hair was fully white now, and he moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who had learned to protect his joints. But his eyes, when she got out of the car and he looked at her, those were the same eyes she had known since she was a child, sharp and reading everything. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at her bag, at her face, at the way she was standing. "You look like your father," he said. She wasn't sure if that was a comfort or a warning. Maybe both. "Come inside," he said. "It's too cold." The house smelled like wood smoke and old books, and the particular dusty warmth of a home that had been lived in for decades by a man who read too much and cleaned just enough. He took her coat. He brought her to the kitchen, which was the largest room and the warmest, and he put a kettle on without asking and set 2 cups on the table. She sat. She reached into her coat, which he was still holding, and retrieved the hard drive and set it on the table between them. Adrian looked at it. He sat down across from her. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning of tonight. Everything you touched, everything you read, everything you heard. She told him. She was methodical and precise, and she did not editorialize. She laid out the facts in the order she had encountered them: the phone, the message from Victoria, the financial documents, the legal brief about the trust dissolution, the audio file. She told him the exact words Vincent had used. Evelyn and the child are complications we need to handle. She said them flatly, without inflection, because she was not ready to feel them yet, and she understood somehow that Adrian did not need her to perform her devastation for him. He needed the facts. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat with his hands wrapped around his tea and looked at the table. "How long?" she said. He looked up at her. "How long what?" "How long have you known something was wrong?" The pause he took was its own answer. Adrian Callahan had spent 40 years in the Whitmore family's confidence, and he did not flinch easily, but he flinched slightly now. "Your father had concerns," he said, "before he died, about Vincent's interest in the trust structure. He asked me to look into a few things." He paused again. "I found some irregularities. Nothing I could prove at the time, but enough that I told your father he should have the marriage contracts reviewed." "And?" "And your father trusted Vincent." His voice was careful. "He believed that Vincent's loyalty to the family was real. He thought I was being paranoid." Evelyn felt something cold move through her chest. "He told me to marry him." "He did." "He introduced us." "He did." Adrian set down his cup. "And I believe he went to his grave thinking he hadn't made a mistake. He didn't know what I was beginning to suspect." She looked at the table. She thought about her father in his last weeks, thin and yellow-eyed and still trying to manage the family's affairs from his hospital bed, still making calls, still trusting the wrong people with the right things. She thought about how much he had loved her and how little of it had protected her from this. "What do the documents say?" she said. "The ones from the trust." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he got up and went to a cabinet beside the kitchen door and unlocked it. A small padlock, old brass, and took out a folder. He set it on the table in front of her. "Your father created a secondary protection layer in the Whitmore Legacy Trust," he said. "A provision that most estate attorneys wouldn't have noticed because it was embedded in language about succession, not about spousal rights. It essentially states that if the primary trustee, which Vincent became upon your marriage, attempted to dissolve or transfer assets outside the bloodline without documented cause, the authority would revert." "Revert to who?" "To you." He sat back down. "The provision names you by birth name, Evelyn Whitmore, not Evelyn Moretti. Your father was specific about that." She stared at the folder. "He knew." "He suspected," Adrian said. "He hoped he was wrong. He structured the trust to protect you if he wasn't." She put her hand flat on the folder. She could feel the texture of the paper through her fingers, and she focused on that, on the specific physical reality of sitting in this kitchen at 1 a.m, because it was easier than sitting inside what she was beginning to understand. Her father had seen this coming. He had not warned her directly, because warning her would have meant telling her the man she was in love with was a predator, and he could not prove it, and he had not wanted to be wrong and destroy her happiness on suspicion alone. So instead he had built a wall she didn't know was there, and hoped she would never need it. She needed it. "We need a forensic accountant," she said, "someone who can trace the transfers. Can you get someone tonight?" Adrian raised his eyebrows slightly. "It's 1 a.m. I know what time it is." He looked at her for another moment. Then he reached for his phone. While Adrian made calls in the hallway, Evelyn opened the folder and began to read. The legal language was dense and deliberate, and she was not an attorney, but she had grown up watching her father read documents at the dinner table, and she understood more than most people assumed. She worked through it slowly, making notes on a pad of paper Adrian had left on the table, writing down the key phrases, the specific clause numbers, the dates. At some point, Adrian came back and set a glass of water at her elbow without comment, and went back out again. She heard him on the phone, his voice low and focused, the particular tone he used when he was asking for something, and making it clear that the asking was a formality. She was on her 3rd page of notes when her phone lit up. Not Vincent this time. A number she didn't recognize, she almost ignored it. Then something made her pick it up. The text read, "Evelyn, it's Daniel Reyes. I was your father's attorney. I heard from Adrian. I need you to know something before morning. Call me when you can." She called immediately. Daniel Reyes had been Richard Whitmore's personal attorney for 20 years. She had met him at the funeral, a careful man with wire-rimmed glasses who had pressed her hand and said if she ever needed anything to call. She had not called. She had thought she didn't need to. "Mrs. Moretti," he said, and she noted that he used the name, not her birth name, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. "Daniel, what do you need to tell me?" He exhaled. "I have been sitting on a piece of information for 8 months, he said, because I did not have sufficient cause to act on it, and because acting without cause in matters involving Vincent Moretti is the kind of thing that ends careers. Or people." He paused. "I'm acting now because Adrian called me, and because I understand the situation has changed. Tell me." 3 months after your father died," Daniel said, "I received a communication from a legal firm I did not recognize, asking for clarification on the Whitmore-Moretti Joint Trust documentation. The communication was framed as a routine audit request, but the questions they were asking were not routine. They were specifically targeted at the provisions relating to spousal dissolution of assets in the event of—" He stopped. "In the event of what?" Evelyn said. "In the event of a spouse's death," Daniel said quietly, "or incapacitation." The kitchen was very quiet. "They were researching," she said, "what would happen to the trust if I died." "Or if you were declared legally incompetent," Daniel said, "which, in practical terms, which is easier to arrange than a death," she said. She heard him breathe. "Yes." She sat very still. Outside the kitchen window, the Westchester night was completely dark and completely silent, and the baby moved inside her, a slow rolling motion like something turning over in deep water, and she felt the hard drive pressing against her sternum, where she had put it and forgotten it was there, and she thought about Vincent's voice on that audio file, complications we need to handle. And she understood fully and finally that she had not simply discovered an affair and a financial scheme. She had discovered that her husband had been researching the logistics of removing her from the equation permanently. That the question was not whether she would lose her assets or her marriage. The question was whether she would lose more than that. She pressed her hand over the hard drive through her coat. "Daniel," she said, "I need you in Westchester by morning." A beat. "I'll leave now." She hung up. Adrian appeared in the doorway. He had heard enough, or read enough in her face. "What?" he said. She looked at him. She thought about the last 2.5 years. The dinners, the trips, the doctor's appointments Vincent had attended in the beginning, sitting beside her with his hand over hers, looking for all the world like a devoted husband. The way he had pressed his palm to her stomach the first time the baby kicked and gone quiet, in a way that had looked like wonder. She had believed all of it, every frame of it. He wasn't just planning to take the money, she said. He was planning something worse. Adrian's face went very still. "I know," he said. And the way he said it, the specific, careful flatness of it, told her he had not simply suspected this tonight. He had been living with this knowledge like a stone in his chest for some time, waiting for the right moment, waiting for her to be ready to hear it. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes," he said, "I should have." He didn't apologize further. She didn't ask him to. There was no time for that conversation, and she understood it would have to wait for a different night, a different version of this, one where she had the luxury of being angry at the people who had tried to protect her by keeping her blind. That night was not tonight. "I need everything you have," she said. "Whatever you've been sitting on, whatever you found, whatever my father told you that you didn't know what to do with." She looked at him steadily. "All of it, tonight." Adrian Callahan, who had served 2 generations of Whitmore family and kept their secrets like other men kept their savings, looked at the woman across the table, 6 months pregnant, coat still half on, eyes clear and dry and absolutely unafraid. And he nodded. He went back to the locked cabinet. He came back with a file 3 inches thick. He set it in front of her and sat down and folded his hands on the table and said, "Then we'd better start." The clock on the kitchen wall read 2:17 in the morning. Outside, somewhere between this quiet house and that glass tower over the Hudson, Vincent Moretti was moving through an empty penthouse and beginning to understand that his wife was not coming back. What he did not understand yet, what he could not possibly know, was that she wasn't running, she was building something, and she had been left, by the man who underestimated her, with everything she needed to finish it. The file was 3 inches thick and it smelled like the inside of a locked cabinet. Dry paper, old ink, the particular mustiness of documents that had been kept in darkness for a long time because the person holding them was not yet ready for them to exist in the light. Evelyn opened it. The first page was a memorandum dated 14 months ago, written in Adrian's precise, angular handwriting. Not typed. Handwritten, which meant he had never intended it to enter any system, any cloud, any device that could be subpoenaed or hacked or accessed without a key and a cabinet and a man willing to hand it over. The memo outlined 3 suspicious wire transfers from a Moretti-controlled account to an offshore holding entity registered in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were large but not enormous, calibrated, she would later understand, to stay just below the threshold that triggered automatic federal review. 87,000, 92,000, 79,000. 3 transfers over 11 months, routed through a layer of shell companies so carefully constructed that tracing them required the kind of forensic attention most accountants would not bother with unless they were specifically looking. Adrian had been specifically looking. She turned the page. A second memo, 2 months after the first. More transfers. A different account, same destination structure. And attached to this one, a single sheet of paper that was not a financial document at all. It was a photograph, printed on plain paper, slightly pixelated from being blown up larger than the original. It showed 2 people at what appeared to be a restaurant table. Small, private room. A candle between them, wine glasses, the body language of people who were not conducting a business meeting. Vincent on the left. Victoria Hale on the right. The date stamp in the corner read 11 months before Evelyn and Vincent's wedding. She set the photograph on the table. She did not look at it again. She turned another page. Adrian came back into the kitchen carrying a second folder, thinner, and he stopped when he saw her face and he did not comment on it. He sat down and opened his own folder, and they worked in parallel, the 2 of them at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, the silence between them, the functional kind. 2 people who understood that talking right now cost time they did not have. At 2:40, Daniel Reyes arrived. He was a trim man in his early 60s, still in the clothes he'd been wearing on Thanksgiving, dress shirt, no tie, gray slacks. And he had the look of someone who had been awake and anxious for hours before the phone call gave him a direction to point it. He shook Evelyn's hand and then sat and opened his briefcase and they got to work. By 4 in the morning, they had assembled the architecture of what Vincent had been building. It had started before the marriage, before the introduction, even before Richard Whitmore had brought Vincent Moretti to the family home in Connecticut and said, "Evelyn, I want you to meet someone." The first Moretti contact with the Whitmore Family Trust had come through a legal intermediary 18 months before that dinner, a quiet inquiry routed through 3 different firms to make it untraceable, requesting documentation on how the trust's bloodline provisions could be challenged. The challenge had been deemed legally impossible at the time. The Whitmore provisions were specific and layered and built by a man who had not trusted easily. So Vincent had taken a different approach. He had become family. He had met Richard Whitmore through a charity board. He had spent 8 months building that relationship carefully. Dinners, phone calls, genuine seeming interest in the family history, the kind of sustained attention that elderly men who had outlived most of their peers found deeply flattering. Richard had liked him. Richard had believed him. And Richard had introduced him to his daughter because Richard believed, right up until the end, that Vincent was what he appeared to be. The marriage had been the key. Once inside the bloodline structure through a legally recognized spouse, Vincent had access. Not complete access. The secondary provisions Evelyn's father had embedded blocked the final transfer. But enough to begin moving assets, enough to begin restructuring the legitimate businesses in ways that would make the eventual takeover clean and complete. The baby had been the final piece. Because once the child was born, Vincent's biological child, a Moretti heir, the trust's bloodline provisions became complicated. A child who shared both bloodlines, held by a father who controlled the estate structure, created legal ambiguities that would take years to untangle. Years during which Vincent would have full operational control. And Evelyn, if she had been removed from the picture, declared incompetent perhaps, or simply gone in whatever way Daniel Reyes had been too careful to say directly on the phone, would not be there to contest it. Evelyn sat with all of this arranged in front of her, and she felt it land in her body the way heavy things land. Not a shock exactly, because some part of her had been processing it since the moment she heard the audio file, but a settling, a final collapse of every remaining structure of disbelief. There was nothing left to not know. She knew all of it now. She pressed her palms flat on the table. "What do we need?" she said. Daniel looked at his notes. "The forensic accountant Adrian contacted. She can be here by 7. She'll need access to the hard drive and to these documents. With what you have, I think we can establish the fraud case within 48 hours. The trust reversal is cleaner. The legal mechanism is already written into the documents. We just need to file." "File where?" "The Whitmore Family Court of Trust jurisdiction. It's a private mechanism. Your father set it up specifically so that disputes would be handled outside the standard court system. 3 trustees who are not affiliated with either family. Adrian has their names." "How long does it take?" "If we file with the evidence you have and the trustees examine the documents," Daniel paused, 2 to 3 days for a preliminary ruling. Possibly faster if the evidence is as clear as it appears. "It's clear," she said. "Then we have a window," Daniel said. "But Evelyn," he leaned forward slightly, "Vincent is going to move when he realizes you're not coming back. He will freeze every account he can access. He will begin the narrative that you've become unstable, that the pregnancy has affected your judgment. His lawyers will be filing before sunrise if he has any sense, and he does have sense." "I know he has sense," she said. "Then you understand that 48 hours may be optimistic." She looked at him. She thought about Vincent on Thanksgiving, the controlled face across the dinner table, the kiss on her forehead, the practiced sincerity of "I love you" delivered by a man who had been planning her removal for 2 years. The thing about someone like Vincent was that he was never unprepared. He was never caught without a contingency. He had built his entire organization on the principle that for every scenario, you had an exit, and for every exit, you had a door behind it. She had spent 2.5 years watching him operate. She knew how he thought, which meant she knew what he would do first. "He'll go after Adrian," she said. Both men looked at her. "Adrian is the one person who can authenticate the secondary provisions in the trust," she said. "If Adrian is discredited or removed from the picture, the filing becomes harder to support. He doesn't need to destroy the documents. He just needs to destroy the witness." The silence in the kitchen went tight. Adrian set down his pen. He said, "I've been careful." "I know you have," she said, "but he's been watching this family for 3 years. He knows who matters." She looked at Adrian. "How many people know you have this file?" "No one living," Adrian said, "except Daniel, and now you." "Then we need to move the file tonight," she said. "Not copy it. Move it, and we need to move you." Adrian opened his mouth. "I'm not asking," she said, quietly. Not unkindly, but with a flatness that came from somewhere she had not known she had access to before tonight. Adrian closed his mouth. They spent the next hour making calls and arrangements she would not record anywhere, plans she would not write down. Logistics that existed only in the heads of the 3 people in that kitchen. Daniel contacted a colleague in Albany. Adrian called a woman Evelyn had never heard of, who apparently owed him something significant from 2009, and was prepared to settle that debt by hosting an elderly man and a box of documents in her guest house in the Catskills until further notice. Marcus, the driver, was still parked at the end of the drive. He would take Adrian north before sunrise. At 5:47 in the morning, Evelyn's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Vincent. She had been waiting for this call since midnight. In some sense, she had been waiting for it for 2.5 years, just without knowing what it actually was. She looked at the phone ringing on the table and she thought about not answering, and then she picked it up. "Vincent," she said. A pause, long enough to be deliberate. "Where are you?" Not a question. The same flat statement of demand that he used with contractors who missed deadlines and employees who made errors. She had heard him use it on other people, and always thought it sounded like a man who was accustomed to having his questions treated as commands. She had never heard it directed at her before. "I'm safe," she said. "That's not what I asked." "I know what you asked." Another pause. She could hear him breathing, slow and controlled, the way he breathed when he was working very hard to stay level. She had watched him do it in tense meetings. She had thought it was admirable once, the discipline of it. "Evelyn." His voice shifted, softer, the register he used when he wanted something. She knew this register so well she could have described every inflection of it. I need you to come home. Whatever you think you saw, whatever you read, I can explain everything. The accounts, the conversations with Victoria, it's more complicated than it looks on paper. You know how this business works. You know there are things that look wrong in documents that aren't wrong. I know that, she said. Then come home and we'll sit down and I'll walk you through everything. You're 6 months pregnant, Ev. You're exhausted and you're scared and you found something in the middle of the night that scared you. That's not the moment to make decisions. She sat with the phone pressed to her ear and she listened to the specific machinery of his manipulation, the tenderness, the reasonable tone, the implicit suggestion that her judgment was compromised, that her fear was irrationality rather than accurate response to genuine threat. And she recognized it with a clarity that she thought might actually break something in her if she let herself feel it fully. She did not let herself feel it fully. I need a few days, she said. I'll be in touch. Evelyn? She hung up. Daniel and Adrian were both watching her. She set the phone face down and picked up her pen. He'll have someone looking for the car within the hour, she said. Marcus needs to go north with Adrian now, and I need a different phone. Daniel reached into his briefcase and produced a prepaid device still in its packaging. He set it on the table without comment. She looked at it and almost laughed, almost, at the specific absurdity of sitting here at 6 in the morning, accepting a burner phone from her dead father's attorney while her husband called to explain away the audio recording of himself planning her disappearance. She didn't laugh. She opened the packaging. Adrian left at 6:15. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen before he went, and he looked at her for a long moment with an expression she could not entirely read, something between guilt and admiration, and the particular grief of an old man who understood he had failed someone and could only try to do better now. Your father would be, he started. Don't, she said. Not harshly, just cleanly. Not right now. He nodded. He went. She heard the car pull away on the gravel, and then there was just the kitchen, and Daniel, and the growing light coming through the window above the sink, the winter sunrise that was more gray than gold and brought no warmth with it. The forensic accountant arrived at 7:10. Her name was Sue Jin Park, and she was 43 years old, and she walked in carrying a laptop bag and an equipment case, and she looked at the pile of documents on the kitchen table and said, "Okay," the way surgeons say it before they begin, not a greeting, a preparation. They worked through the morning. Evelyn answered questions. She translated the financial documents she had copied from Vincent's phone into terms Sue. Jin could cross-reference against the legitimate business records Daniel had brought. The picture that emerged was systematic and patient, and in its own terrible way, impressively constructed. Vincent had been moving money for 4 years, not stealing it outright, reattributing it, reclassifying it, gradually shifting its legal identity from Whitmore family-adjacent assets to Moretti-controlled entities, so slowly and so carefully that a non-specialized review would simply see a business in the process of normal organizational evolution. At 10:13, Sujin looked up from her screen and said, "I have enough." Evelyn said, "How much?" "To establish the fraud case? Enough to trace the full scope?" She exhaled. "I'd need another week in subpoena authority, but to stop the bleeding and establish cause, we have it." "Then let's file," Evelyn said. Daniel was already reaching for his phone. That was when Evelyn's prepaid device rang. She didn't recognize the number. She answered it anyway, because she was operating now on the instinct that the things she didn't expect were the things she needed to pay attention to. "Is this Evelyn Whitmore?" A woman's voice. Precise diction, slight accent she couldn't place immediately. "Who's asking?" "My name is Clara Voss. I'm an attorney. I have been retained by a client who has information material to your current situation. My client wants to meet, today." Evelyn looked at Daniel across the table. He had stopped dialing and was watching her. "Who is your client?" Evelyn said. A brief pause. "My client prefers to remain unidentified until you've agreed to meet, but she wanted me to tell you one thing to establish good faith." Another pause. "She wanted me to tell you that Victoria Hale did not begin this plan with Vincent Moretti. She was recruited into it, and she is not his ally anymore." The kitchen was absolutely quiet. "Where?" Evelyn said. "Midtown. There's a hotel on 54th and 6th, the Hargrove. We can have a suite available at 2 o'clock. "I'll be there at 2, Evelyn said. She hung up. Daniel said, That could be a trap. It could be, she said, but Vincent could be using Victoria to draw you back into the city. He could be. Evelyn, I know. She looked at him steadily. I know every way that could go wrong. But if Victoria has turned, she has information we don't. She was inside the operation longer than any document trail. If she's willing to give us what she knows, she stopped. We can't afford not to go. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. He had the face of a man running rapid calculations and not loving any of the outcomes. I'm going with you, he said. You're not, she said. You're staying here and filing what we have with the trust court. That is the priority. The filing cannot wait. She stood, slowly, and her back announced itself with the usual violence, and she pressed her hand into it and breathed and kept going. Get me a car, not Marcus. Someone Vincent doesn't know. Daniel made a call. She went to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror for the first time since Thanksgiving night. She looked worse than she expected and better than she had any right to. Her eyes were clear. That surprised her. 6 months pregnant, no sleep, the complete structural collapse of her life, and her eyes were clear and focused and looked like someone was home in them, someone who was not interested in being underestimated right now. She washed her face. She straightened her clothes. She pressed both hands to her stomach and felt the baby move, a sharp little kick this time, purposeful, like he was reminding her he was there. I know, she said, out loud this time. At noon, while she was eating the first thing she'd consumed since Thanksgiving dinner, toast and an egg, because Daniel had insisted, and she had not had the energy to argue. Her phone lit up with a news alert. She almost ignored it. She didn't. The headline read, Whitmore Family Trust under investigation. Sources cite mismanagement by surviving heir. Her stomach dropped. She read the article. It was short, vague, sourced entirely to individuals familiar with the matter. The language of coordinated leaks. The language of someone who had called a contact at a financial news outlet and fed them a narrative carefully calibrated to establish a public record before any filing could counter it. Vincent's lawyers had moved faster than she expected. And the narrative they had established was this. Evelyn Whitmore Moretti, 6 months pregnant and emotionally distressed, had absconded with confidential financial documents belonging to the Moretti business portfolio and was believed to be in an unstable psychological state. Concerned parties had reached out to medical professionals. The family was hoping for a swift resolution. She set the phone down. She thought about what Daniel had said the night before. He will begin the narrative that you've become unstable. She had known it was coming. She had known it and had not moved fast enough to prevent it. Her hands were on the table and she looked at them and she thought about the specific ancient misery of being a woman with accurate information and watching the world prepare to dismiss her anyway. She thought about what it would look like to the 3 trust court adjudicators when they received Daniel's filing this afternoon and then opened their browsers and saw this headline. She thought about how quickly a narrative about an unstable pregnant woman could take hold, how little evidence it required, how much effort it would take to dismantle. She thought about her father, who had trusted Vincent Moretti. She thought about Adrian, who had known and waited too long. She thought about herself 6 months ago, standing in a dressing room pinning fabric swatches to a board of paint chips, while Vincent sat in a chair behind her telling her the nursery would be beautiful, whatever she chose. His voice warm and certain, his eyes, she understood now, calculating something she could not see. She picked up the toast and finished it. She drank the water. She stood up. The car Daniel had arranged would be here in 40 minutes. The hotel was 45 minutes away. She was going to meet a woman who may or may not be able to help her, in a hotel room she may or may not be walking into safely, to gather information that may or may not exist. She had no certainty about any of it. What she had was this: the hard drive pressed against her sternum, the trust filing Daniel would submit in the next 2 hours, Sujin Park's forensic report on a laptop in the car, and a headline designed to destroy her credibility before she could use any of it. She had 12 hours, she estimated, before Vincent's lawyers made a formal move. Maybe less. The kind of legal machinery Vincent had access to moved fast when he decided to deploy it, and he had decided. She looked at the kitchen where she had spent the night building something she had believed was solid. She was about to find out how solid it actually was, because Vincent Moretti, who had spent 3 years believing she was not paying attention, had just shown her something she needed to know about him. When he was frightened, he moved publicly. He wanted the narrative established. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the world to see the story his way before she could tell it herself. which meant he was frightened, which meant, underneath all of it, he believed she could win. She picked up her coat and the hard drive that was still pressed against her skin like a second heartbeat, and she walked to the front of the house to wait for the car, and her mind was running very fast and very cold and very clear in the way that only happens to people who have lost everything they thought they were fighting to protect and discovered, somewhere in the rubble of that, what they were actually made of. She was Richard Whitmore's daughter. She had been raised to understand that power was not protected by emotion, it was protected by preparation. She had one shot at this. She was not going to miss it. The car was a gray sedan, unremarkable, the kind that disappeared in Manhattan traffic the way water disappeared into water. The driver was a woman in her 40s who did not introduce herself and did not make conversation, which was exactly what Evelyn needed for 45 minutes of moving through the city with her thoughts running at the speed they were running. She sat in the van pressed flat against her stomach, and she watched the Westchester County line give way to the Bronx and then to the upper stretches of Manhattan, the buildings getting taller and closer together, the traffic thickening, the city reasserting itself around her the way it always did. Indifferent to whatever personal catastrophe you were carrying, utterly uninterested in making room for it. She had the forensic report on her phone. Sujin had sent it encrypted at 11:45. Daniel had the filing ready and had confirmed via 2 texts to her prepaid device that it would be submitted to the Whitmore Trust Court by 1 o'clock. That gave her 1 hour before the legal machinery started moving, and however many hours before Vincent's people realized it had moved and began to counter. She had a window. She did not know how wide it was. The Hargrove Hotel on 54th and 6th was the kind of establishment that operated on the principle of discretion as a luxury amenity. The lobby was understated, the staff had been trained to look through you in a polite way, and the elevators required a room key to operate above the 3rd floor. The woman at the front desk confirmed there was a suite registered to a C. Voss and provided a key card without additional comment. Evelyn rode the elevator to the 9th floor. The corridor was quiet, deep carpeted, the particular hush of expensive midday hotels when the business travelers are in meetings and the leisure guests are at lunch. She found the room number. She stood outside it for a moment. She knocked. The door opened, and it was not Clara Voss. It was Victoria Hale. Evelyn had prepared herself for this moment in the car, in the specific way she had prepared for everything since midnight, by imagining the worst version and then deciding in advance how she would hold her body, how she would breathe, what her face would do. She had imagined Victoria, and she had told herself she was ready. She was not ready. Victoria Hale looked like someone who had also not slept and had been crying, though she was the kind of woman who cried with discipline. Eyes red-rimmed but dry now, makeup stripped away, wearing a plain gray sweater and dark trousers that made her look like a different person than the polished acquisition consultant Evelyn had met 3 times in professional settings. She looked smaller. She looked like she was afraid. She stepped back from the door. "Please come in," she said. Evelyn came in. The suite had a sitting area with 2 chairs and a low table. Clara Voss was there, a compact woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a legal pad already open on her knee. She nodded at Evelyn. Evelyn nodded back. Nobody sat down immediately. There was a moment where the 3 women simply occupied the room, and the weight of what had brought them there pressed down on all of it. Then Evelyn looked at Victoria and said, "Start talking." Victoria looked at Clara. Clara gave a small nod. Victoria sat. She pressed her hands together between her knees and looked at the floor, and then looked up at Evelyn with the expression of someone who has rehearsed an apology and knows it is not going to be enough and is going to say it anyway. "I met Vincent 6 years ago," she said. "Before you. Before any of this. He was—" She stopped. Started again. "He told me we would build something together. He told me the Moretti organization was going to be the largest private financial entity on the East Coast, and I was going to be part of that. I believed him." She exhaled. "I was with him for 2 years before he ended it." Evelyn said nothing. "He ended it to pursue the Whitmore connection," Victoria said. "He didn't tell me that at the time. He told me the relationship had run its course and that we would continue working together professionally." Her jaw tightened. "I accepted that. I told myself it was true. And then 18 months later, he brought me back in. Told me there was an opportunity, a restructuring, that my expertise in international transfers was needed. He made me part of the plan." She looked at Evelyn. Your plan. The plan involving you. You knew, Evelyn said. When you were sending those messages last night, you knew what he intended for me. Yes. You knew what was in the audio file. I was in the room when he recorded it. Victoria's voice was flat, factual. The voice of someone who had run out of self-protective distance from what they had done. I didn't say anything in that recording because he'd asked me to stay quiet while he spoke. He does this. He records things and doesn't tell the other people in the room. I found out later I was on it. Evelyn felt something move through her. Not anger exactly, something colder. Why are you here? Because 3 weeks ago he told me what the next phase was. Victoria stopped. Her hands were very still between her knees. He wasn't planning to just remove you from the trust. He had arranged a psychiatric consultation, a private one, off the record, with a physician who has done this kind of assessment for him before. The kind of assessment that produces a specific result. I was going to have you declared unfit for independent decision-making. The grounds were going to be pregnancy-related psychological instability. The room was very quiet. He had the filing prepared, Victoria continued. Once you were declared legally incapacitated, he would have guardianship petitioned through a friendly court contact. The baby would be registered under Moretti-controlled trust provisions. You would have been managed in a facility indefinitely. She said it all in the same flat voice, one fact after another, like she was reading a list. When he told me, he said it like it was logistics, like you were a property dispute. Evelyn's hand was on her stomach. She had not moved it there consciously. She became aware of it and left it there. Why didn't you go to the police? Evelyn said. Victoria made a sound that was almost a laugh. Because the physician he uses is connected to 2 federal judges and a state attorney. Because 3 of the people who could corroborate what I know have already been repositioned, transferred to jurisdictions where they can't be easily reached. She looked at Evelyn steadily. Because I was part of it long enough that going to the police means I go too. So you came to me instead. I came to you, Victoria said, because you're the only person in this situation who has both the evidence and the legal standing to actually stop him. And because she stopped. The professional composure she had maintained cracked slightly, not dramatically, just a fault line visible for a second. Because I was there when the plan was first discussed. I was sitting across from him when he said your name for the first time as a target. I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't my business. She looked at the floor. That's going to be the thing I live with. Evelyn studied her. She thought about the message on Vincent's phone. Tonight changes everything. Soon there will be nothing left connecting you to her. She had read that message and built her entire night around it. And the woman who sent it was sitting 6 feet away from her with red eyes and a gray sweater, looking like someone who had finally collided with the consequences of every choice she had made. Evelyn did not feel compassion. She wasn't capable of that right now. But she recognized what she was looking at. What do you have? Evelyn said. Victoria reached for a manila envelope on the table beside her and held it out. Evelyn took it. Inside was a series of documents she had not seen before. Internal memos from the physician Vincent used, establishing a prearranged framework for the psychiatric assessment. The physician's name, the clinic, the date of the scheduled evaluation, December 10th, 16 days away. Accompanying the memos was a legal brief she recognized as the work of the same outside attorney who had prepared the trust dissolution document, outlining the guardianship petition structure, listing the specific judges who would be approached, detailing the timeline from assessment to filing to approval. There was also a photograph. It showed Vincent and a man she did not recognize standing outside a building she recognized immediately, the federal courthouse on Pearl Street. The date stamp was 4 days ago. Who is the other man? Evelyn said. Judge Warren Collis, Victoria said. He handles civil commitment proceedings in New York County. Evelyn put the photograph down on the table. She looked at it. She looked at it for a long time, at the 2 men standing outside the courthouse in their good coats, talking in the easy way of people who have known each other long enough that the conversation is not an introduction, it is a continuation. Vincent's head slightly tilted, his body language relaxed. This was not a meeting he was nervous about. This was a maintenance call, a checkpoint. She closed the envelope. I need everything you have, she said. Every document, every communication, every record of every conversation where this was discussed. Clara can prepare an affidavit based on your testimony. I need it done today. Victoria said, That will take hours. Then we'd better start now, Evelyn said. She called Daniel. He answered on the first ring. Tell me the filing went through, she said. Confirmed at 12:58, he said. I have a receipt number and a direct contact at the court. The trustees have been notified and the emergency review provision has been triggered. We should have a preliminary response within... Daniel, she cut him off. I have new evidence, a corroborating witness and documentation of a planned psychiatric commitment. I need you here. A pause. Where is here? She gave him the hotel name. He said 40 minutes. She said 30. She put the phone in her pocket and turned back to Victoria. Start at the beginning, she said. Every detail. We are going to document all of it. They worked for 2 hours. Evelyn sat in the second chair and said almost nothing. She listened. She watched Victoria talk, watched her construct the timeline of 4 years in Vincent Moretti's orbit, watched her navigate the specific shame of a person laying out their own complicity in the act of exposing it. Clara Voss wrote everything. Daniel arrived at 2:40 and took over the legal structuring, asking precise questions in a precise voice, building the affidavit sentence by sentence, reading each section back for confirmation. The baby moved constantly. Evelyn kept her hand on her side and breathed. At 3:50, Daniel's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression did something that Evelyn had not seen on his face before. A brief, sharp contraction, like a man absorbing a punch he had been told was coming. It's the trust court, he said. He answered. He walked to the window. Evelyn watched his back and listened to the single-sided conversation, which was mostly silence on his end, punctuated by short words. Yes, I understand, and when. He hung up. He turned around. One of the 3 trustees has recused himself, he said. Conflict of interest. He cited a prior professional relationship with the Moretti organization. Evelyn said, Which one? Daniel said the name. She did not recognize it. She looked at Adrian's file in her head, the roster of trustee names he had mentioned in the kitchen, and placed it. The third name, the one Adrian had flagged as a recent appointment, made 2 years ago at Vincent's recommendation. She had noted it and moved on. She had not thought it was relevant. He was placed, she said. Vincent put him on the trust board. It appears so, Daniel said, which means we're down to 2 trustees for the preliminary ruling. What does that do to the timeline? A split decision requires, Daniel stopped, a full 3-trustee panel for any contested ruling. With 1 recused, both remaining trustees must agree. If they split, the ruling is deferred to a superior court, which adds, he paused, weeks, possibly months. And in those months, he didn't answer. He didn't need to. In those months, Vincent filed the psychiatric assessment. In those months, the guardianship petition moved through Judge Warren Collis. In those months, a woman who had exposed her husband's scheme against her became, in the legal record, a woman who had stolen documents and fled the family home in a state of psychological crisis. And the baby she was carrying became property of a dispute that would not be resolved before he was born. Evelyn stood up. She stood at the window where Daniel had just been standing, and she looked out at 54th Street, and she watched the city moving below her, cabs and pedestrians and a food cart on the corner sending up steam in the cold air. And she felt the specific weight of having done everything right and still watching the architecture tilt against her. She had the evidence. She had the witness. She had the filing. She had followed every rule, built every case with precision and care, done everything her father had taught her about protecting power through preparation. And Vincent had placed a man on the trust board 2 years ago. He had been thinking about this longer than she had. Her phone buzzed. The prepaid device, not her personal phone. She looked at the screen. A text from a number she didn't recognize. He knows where you are. He has had the hotel under surveillance since noon. He's not coming himself. He's sending legal. You have 20 minutes before they arrive with a court order. She showed the screen to Daniel. He read it. Who sent that? I don't know, she said. She looked at Victoria. Do you know this number? Victoria looked at the screen. Something moved across her face. That's one of his security people, she said quietly. Someone on the inside who... She stopped. Someone who didn't agree with the plan. He reached out to me 3 weeks ago. I didn't know how far to trust him. 20 minutes. Evelyn looked at Daniel. Can we move the filing to emergency status? Is there a mechanism? There's an emergency injunction process through the Superior Court, he said. But we'd need a judge willing to hear it on same-day basis, and the evidence package would need to be... Do we have what we need for it? He looked at the envelope in her hands, at Clara's legal pad, at Victoria sitting in the chair across the room. We might, he said, but it would require going in front of a judge we can't vet in advance, with evidence that hasn't been formally— Daniel. She looked at him. Do we have what we need? He held her gaze. Yes. Then call the court. He was already reaching for his phone. The next 17 minutes were the kind that compress in memory afterward, not because they were slow, but because they were so dense with decisions that time moved strangely. Daniel on the phone with the Superior Court clerk, Clara compiling the affidavit into a formal submission, Victoria signing her name to pages and pages of testimony in handwriting that was surprisingly steady for a person whose hands Evelyn could see were shaking. Evelyn packing everything into Daniel's briefcase with the methodical speed of someone who understood that the next location she was in needed to be inside a courthouse, because a courthouse was the one place Vincent could not send private legal representatives with a court order and expect her to simply comply. At 14 minutes, Daniel said, "We have a judge, chambers on 60 Center Street. She can hear a preliminary motion at 5 o'clock. Evelyn said, "Call a car." At 16 minutes, they were in the elevator. At 18 minutes, they were in the lobby. At 19 minutes, the doors at the front of the Hargrove Hotel opened and 3 men in dark overcoats walked in carrying briefcases with the specific purposefulness of people who had a destination in mind and a document in hand. Evelyn saw them from across the lobby. They had not seen her yet. She turned toward the side exit, a corridor that led to the hotel's conference facilities and connected to the building adjacent. She had not known this before this moment. She knew it because she had looked at the building map mounted inside the elevator, the way she had trained herself to look at every map and every exit since leaving the penthouse, because she was Richard Whitmore's daughter, and his first rule had not been about power. It had been about rooms. Always know how many ways out of a room you have, he had told her when she was 12 years old, and they were touring a building he was thinking about buying. A room with one exit is not a room. It's a trap. The side corridor led to a service door that opened onto 55th Street. She walked through it without hurrying, without looking back, Daniel beside her and Victoria a half step behind, and Clara already on her phone with a car service. The cold hit her on the street and she breathed it and kept moving. The car was there in 3 minutes. They got in. The driver pulled into traffic and Evelyn sat in the middle of the back seat with Daniel on her left and Victoria on her right and the briefcase across her knees, and she put both hands on it and pressed down like she was trying to hold something still. Her heart was going very fast. She noticed this. She focused on her breathing, slow in, slow out, the way the midwife had taught her in the first prenatal class she had attended, which she had attended alone because Vincent had a meeting that night and had apologized and said he would make the next one. He had not made the next one either. Slow in, slow out. The baby kicked, sharp and insistent, like a reminder. "I know," she said, out loud this time, and Daniel glanced at her and said nothing, and the car moved south through the grid of Midtown Manhattan toward 60 Center Street and the courthouse that was either going to be the place where she stopped all of this or the place where she ran out of options. Daniel got a call at 4:12. He answered it and listened, and the color left his face in the specific way it does when the news is not just bad, but structural. Not a problem, but a change in the ground beneath the problem. He hung up. He turned to her. "Vincent filed the psychiatric petition 20 minutes ago," he said. "Through Judge Careless. It's already docketed." He paused. "There's a companion order requesting your immediate evaluation. If a law enforcement officer encounters you before we get in front of Judge Nakamura at 5 o'clock, they have grounds to detain me," she said. "To take you into protective custody pending evaluation," he said, "which is not the same thing legally, but is the same thing practically." Evelyn looked out the window at the city going by. She thought about that, being taken somewhere, being assessed, being held in a place where the evidence in her briefcase and the testimony of the woman beside her and everything she had built through the night and the day became inaccessible, became theoretical, became the claims of a woman whose husband had already filed court documents questioning her stability. She thought about the baby. She thought about December 10th, the scheduled assessment date on the documents in her envelope, and how Vincent had been so confident it would reach that date that he had not considered the possibility it would be forced before then. Because he had not considered the possibility that she would move this fast. She had moved this fast. She was still moving. "How far?" she said to the driver. 8 minutes, he said. Make it 5, she said. He made it 6. She didn't hold it against him. They went through the security line at the Center Street entrance with the efficiency of people who understood they were on a clock that nobody in this building knew about yet. Daniel had his attorney credentials. Clara had hers. Victoria had her ID and the affidavit she had signed 30 minutes ago. Evelyn had her own ID and her bag and the briefcase and the hard drive still against her skin and a pregnancy that made the security officer ask if she was all right, and she said yes and kept walking. The elevator took them to the 4th floor. Daniel led them down a corridor and through a set of double doors and into the anteroom outside chambers marked with the nameplate, Judge Helen Nakamura. A clerk looked up from behind a desk. Daniel said, Daniel Reyes for the emergency injunction hearing. We have a 5 o'clock. The clerk said, Judge Nakamura is aware. She'll be ready in 10 minutes. Evelyn sat. She sat in a wooden chair against the wall of the anteroom, and she put the briefcase on her knees, and she put her hands on top of it, and she breathed. Victoria sat beside her. Clara was already organizing documents. Daniel was at the clerk's desk going over submission protocols. The anteroom was small and beige and utterly unremarkable, the kind of bureaucratic space that existed in thousands of government buildings across the country, lit by overhead fluorescents that made everyone look faintly unwell. It smelled like recycled air and copier toner and the particular staleness of a room that was used for difficult things every day without acknowledgement. Evelyn looked at the wall. She thought about Thanksgiving night, the table she had set with the good silverware and the crystal glasses, the turkey cooling in the kitchen when he left, the phone on the counter beside the fruit bowl. She thought about the moment the screen had lit up in her hand. 27 hours ago. She had been a different person 27 hours ago. Not a better or worse one. Just a person who still had the option of not knowing. That option was gone. It had been gone since she read the first message and couldn't unknow it, couldn't set the phone back down and decide it was a misunderstanding, couldn't perform the willed blindness that her life had apparently depended on. She had not been able to do it. She did not think she would have wanted to, even if she could have. The door to chambers opened. A woman appeared. 50s, dark suit, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. The bearing of someone who had been sitting in judgment of difficult situations for long enough that the difficulty itself no longer rattled her. Judge Helen Nakamura looked at the anteroom and its occupants and said, "Come in." They came in. The chamber was smaller than courtrooms Evelyn had seen on television, larger than she expected for a private hearing. A wide desk with stacks of folders. Bookshelves on 2 walls. A single window looking out at the darkening late afternoon sky over lower Manhattan. The judge sat behind her desk. She looked at Daniel. She looked at the documents Clara set before her. She looked at Victoria. And then she looked at Evelyn. Evelyn met her eyes. She had been looked at by powerful people before. Vincent's associates, his lawyers, the men who sat around conference tables and assessed her the way you assess furniture, deciding if it was appropriate for the room. She had learned over 2.5 years to tolerate that look, to wait it out, to let it pass without showing what she was thinking. She did not do that now. She held the judge's gaze with everything she had left, which was less than she'd started the night with and more than she'd expected to still have access to, and she said, without Daniel prompting her, without anything except the clarity that had been building since midnight, "Your Honor, my name is Evelyn Whitmore. My husband has filed a petition to have me declared legally incompetent. I have evidence that this petition is part of a 4-year fraud against my family's estate, and I have a witness prepared to testify to that fact today. I am asking for an emergency injunction to suspend the psychiatric evaluation order until this evidence can be properly reviewed." She set the briefcase on the edge of the desk. "Everything you need is in here," she said. Judge Nakamura looked at the briefcase. She looked at Evelyn. She picked up her pen. "Mr. Reyes," she said, "walk me through it." Daniel opened the briefcase. Evelyn sat back. Outside the window, the sky above Manhattan had gone the deep blue-gray of a winter evening coming in fast, the lights of the city beginning to assert themselves against the dark. The river somewhere to the south, invisible but present. The whole enormous indifferent machine of the city running on around a 4th-floor chamber where a judge, with a legal pad, was reading the first page of a forensic accountant's report, while a pregnant woman sat very still and waited for the moment her life either turned or didn't. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it under the edge of the desk so as not to interrupt. A text from an unknown number, the same one that had warned her at the hotel. It read, "He's in the building." Evelyn read the text twice. Then she folded her hands on top of the briefcase and looked at the wall above Judge Nakamura's head, and she thought very clearly, of course he is. Vincent Moretti did not send people to do things he considered important. He came himself. She had watched him operate long enough to know that about him, that the moments he chose to appear in person were the moments he believed his presence alone would change the outcome. He had built his entire organization on that principle. Walk into the room, let them see you, let them remember who you are. He was in the building because he believed that seeing him would make her fold. She put the phone in her pocket. Daniel was 3 pages into his presentation. Judge Nakamura was reading, making small marks in the margin of the forensic report with a pencil she held very lightly, the way people hold things when they are reading carefully and their hands need something to do. Victoria was sitting to Evelyn's left, upright, her own copy of the affidavit on her lap, eyes forward. Clara was at the small table to the side, organizing the supplementary documents in the sequence Daniel had requested. Evelyn did not interrupt. She sat with the knowledge that Vincent was somewhere in this building, and she let that knowledge settle into her body the way you let cold water settle, feeling every degree of it, letting it reach the places it was going to reach, and then deciding what to do next. What she decided was nothing. Not yet. Because Daniel was talking and Judge Nakamura was reading, and that process was the only thing that mattered in this room right now, and disrupting it to announce that her husband had tracked her to the courthouse would cost more than it gained. She had 7 minutes before Vincent found the right floor. Maybe 10. She would give Daniel those minutes. She looked at the window. The sky was fully dark now, the city's ambient light turning the clouds the particular muddy orange of a New York winter night. She could see the reflection of the chamber in the glass, the desk, the books, the lamp's yellow cone, the 5 of them arranged around the business of evidence and testimony, and the slow grinding machinery of the law attempting to respond faster than it was built to go. She looked at herself in the glass, a woman in a coat, 6 months pregnant, hands folded, waiting. She looked like her father. She had not let herself think that when Adrian said it, because she had not been ready for it then. She was ready for it now. She held it. Daniel reached the Victoria Hale affidavit at minute 5. He placed it in front of Judge Nakamura and said, "Your Honor, this testimony establishes that the psychiatric petition filed this afternoon was not a responsive legal action, but a planned component of a coordinated scheme to defraud the Whitmore Family Trust. The evaluation was prearranged. The outcome was predetermined. The physician is named in the supporting documentation." The judge looked at the affidavit. She looked at Victoria. "You signed this?" "Yes, Your Honor," Victoria said. "You understand the personal legal exposure this creates for you?" "Yes," Victoria said. "I do." Judge Nakamura looked at the document for another long moment. Then she set it down and looked at Daniel. "The companion order from Judge Careless. How was it processed so quickly?" "We believe through a pre-established protocol," Daniel said carefully. "The petition language was clearly drafted in advance. The supporting medical framework was prepared weeks ago. This was not an emergency filing. It was a triggered deployment." The judge's expression did not change. She had the professional stillness of someone who had been surprised by human behavior often enough that she had stopped showing it externally. But Evelyn watched her eyes move across the documentation, and she saw the specific quality of attention that meant the person was absorbing something they found significant. "I'd like to speak with the witness directly," the judge said. "Mrs. Hale, tell me in your own words, without the document, when you first understood that this psychiatric petition was being planned." Victoria straightened. 3 weeks ago. Vincent, Mr. Moretti, called a planning meeting. Myself, his outside counsel, and the physician in question. He laid out the timeline. December 10th for the evaluation. He expected a finding of incapacity within 48 hours. Guardianship petition through Judge Careless within the week. And Mrs. Moretti's condition, did he cite any specific medical basis? Pregnancy-related anxiety disorder, Victoria said. He had documentation prepared. I don't know if the documentation was fabricated or if it came from a real source. I only know that the conclusion was decided before the evaluation was scheduled. The judge wrote something on her pad. The door to chambers opened. Not a knock. Not a clerk entering with a message. The door opened the way doors open when the person on the other side has decided that waiting for permission is not a relevant consideration. Vincent Moretti walked in. He was in his dark overcoat, and he was accompanied by two men Evelyn recognized as senior attorneys from the Moretti legal team. Thomas Breck on the left, gray-suited, briefcase in hand, the expression of a man who had cleared this kind of room before. A younger associate on the right, whose name she had never learned. Vincent himself looked exactly as he always looked, composed, assured, occupying whatever space he entered as though he had always been its primary resident and everyone else was a visitor. He did not look at Evelyn first. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice warm, controlled, exactly calibrated. "I apologize for the interruption. I understand there's a hearing in progress, and I want to assure you that my presence here is not adversarial. I'm deeply concerned about my wife's welfare, and Mr. Moretti." Judge Nakamura's voice was quiet and had no temperature in it whatsoever. "You have just opened the door to my private chambers during an active hearing without being announced or invited. You will stop speaking." Vincent stopped. Evelyn watched his jaw tighten by approximately 2 millimeters. She had been watching his jaw for 2.5 years, and she knew exactly what that particular tension meant. He was recalibrating. "Thomas." The judge's eyes moved to Breck. "You know better than this." Breck said, "Your Honor, we have a filed order from—" "I'm aware of the careless order," she said, "which is currently the subject of this proceeding. Sit down, all of you. Do not speak unless I address you directly." Breck sat. The associate sat. Vincent remained standing for exactly 1 beat too long. Not defiance, exactly, but the reflex of a man whose body had not yet fully received the message that the room did not belong to him. Then he sat. And for the first time since he walked through the door, he looked at Evelyn. She had prepared for this too. She had thought about it in the car, in the anteroom, during the last 20 minutes of sitting in this chamber. What it would feel like to be looked at by him for the first time since Thanksgiving night, since the phone, since the audio file, since the whole architecture of what she had believed had come down around her. She had thought she would feel something violent, rage maybe, or the specific grief of looking at a person you loved and seeing clearly, for the first time, that the love was not the thing that was real. What she actually felt was simpler than that. She felt the absence of fear. She had been afraid of something for a long time, not of Vincent specifically, but of the formless anxiety that had lived in her chest for months, the sense that something was wrong that she couldn't name, the way she had trained herself to explain away every small wrongness, because naming it would have meant dismantling everything. That fear was gone. It had burned off somewhere between the kitchen counter and this room, somewhere between finding the phone and sitting in this chair, and what was left in its place was something she could only describe as ground, solid and low and absolutely hers. She held his gaze. She did not look away. Something moved across his face. She did not know what to call it. It was not remorse and it was not fear. Not exactly. It was closer to recognition. The look of a man who has been playing a long game and has just understood, perhaps for the first time with his whole body rather than just his intellect, that the other person has been playing too. He looked away first. Judge Nakamura said, "Mr. Reyes, continue." Daniel continued. He laid out the remaining evidence with the methodical patience of a man who understood that the record being built right now would outlast every person in this room. He walked through the trust dissolution framework. He walked through the 4-year asset transfer scheme. He placed the photograph of Vincent and Judge Collis outside the courthouse before the judge, with a single sentence. "This photograph was taken 4 days ago and corroborates the coordinated nature of today's filing." Breck said, "Objection. You're not in a courtroom, Mr. Breck," the judge said without looking up. Breck closed his mouth. Daniel placed the final document, the memorandum from the physician's office, establishing the prearranged evaluation framework, and stepped back. "Your Honor," he said, "the evidence before you establishes that the psychiatric petition filed today by Vincent Moretti is not a good faith legal action. It is a component of a sustained fraud against the Whitmore Family Trust and against my client personally. We are requesting an emergency injunction suspending the careless order and staying all related proceedings pending a full evidentiary hearing." Judge Nakamura set down her pencil. She looked at the documents in front of her. She looked at Thomas Breck. "Counselor, you have 5 minutes. Give me the best argument you have." Breck stood. He was good at his job. She had always recognized that about the people Vincent chose, that he chose competence above loyalty when competence was available, and he made the argument cleanly. The documents were stolen. The affidavit was self-serving testimony from a co-conspirator with personal legal exposure. The psychiatric petition was filed in good faith by a concerned husband whose wife had left the marital home in the middle of the night, without notice, 6 months pregnant, taking confidential business documents. The chain of custody on the evidence was unverified. The forensic report had been prepared in under 12 hours by an analyst retained by the opposing party. He was not wrong about any of it, technically. Each point was accurate. Each point was also the kind of truth that was only true if you ignored every piece of context surrounding it, the way you could accurately describe the ocean as wet, without mentioning that it was also miles deep and full of things that would kill you. When Breck finished, the judge looked at the table for a long moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Moretti, I'd like to hear from you." Evelyn stood. Her back was a continuous low roar of pain, and she ignored it. She put her hands at her sides and she looked at Judge Nakamura and she spoke. "I am 6 months pregnant," she said. "I have not slept in over 30 hours. I am standing in a courthouse on the day after Thanksgiving because the alternative was to allow my husband to have me committed to a psychiatric facility based on an evaluation that was arranged before anyone had assessed my mental state. That is the entire situation." She paused. "I am not unstable. I am not in crisis. I am a woman who found evidence of a crime being committed against her family, and I have spent the last 27 hours trying to make sure that evidence reached someone with the authority to act on it." She looked at the judge steadily. "That is the only thing I have done. I would like the opportunity to do it through the legal system rather than be prevented from doing so by the same legal system being used against me." The room was quiet. Somewhere to her left, she heard Vincent exhale. She did not look at him. The judge wrote something. She wrote for longer than felt comfortable. The room sat with the sound of a pencil on a legal pad, and the ambient building hum, and the distant muffled noise of the city outside the window. Then Judge Nakamura looked up. "I am issuing a temporary stay of the careless order effective immediately, pending review of the evidence submitted today," she said. "I am also referring the matter of Judge Carless's involvement to the Administrative Oversight Office for examination of the procedural timeline. Mr. Breck, the stay applies to all related proceedings. Any attempt to enforce the careless order while the stay is active will be treated as contempt." She looked at Breck. "You will convey that to your client." Breck said, "Your Honor, that was not an invitation to respond," she said. She looked at Evelyn. "I am scheduling a full evidentiary hearing for Monday morning, 8 a.m. You will need to be present with counsel and all evidence submitted today, authenticated and in proper chain of custody order. Is that understood?" Daniel said, "Yes, Your Honor." "Mrs. Moretti," the judge said, "is that understood?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "Thank you." The judge looked at the room. "We're done for today." She stood. Everyone stood. The clerk appeared from a side door and the judge moved through it and was gone. And the chamber shifted from a space of authority into simply a room, and the people in it began to exist again in relation to one another without the structure that had been holding them in place. Evelyn looked at Vincent. He was standing. His coat was still on. He was looking at her with an expression she had spent 2.5 years learning to read, and she understood now that she had been reading it wrong the entire time, had been translating it through a dictionary of her own hope, seeing complexity where there was simply calculation. He did not look remorseful. He did not look defeated. He looked like a man who had been outmaneuvered in a single round and was already running the next one. She had known he would look like that. She had planned for it. She walked toward him. She heard Daniel make a small sound, not a warning exactly, just the sound of a person who was not sure this was a good idea. And she kept walking until she was standing close enough to speak quietly and have it not carry to the other side of the room. "I know what you're going to do next," she said. His eyes moved over her face. The calculation running behind them was visible if you knew what you were looking at. "Evelyn, you're going to find another angle," she said. "Another filing, another contact, another way to slow this down until you can restructure enough of the assets that the evidence becomes historical rather than active. You're going to try to settle this privately. You're going to say the right things about the baby and ask me to consider what this means for him." She held his gaze. "And I want you to understand that I have considered that. I considered it last night and this morning and every minute of today. I have thought about nothing except what this means for my son." "He's my son too," Vincent said. His voice was very low. "I know he is," she said. "That's the one thing in all of this that was real. I know that." She paused. "Which is exactly why I'm going to make sure he never spends a single day of his life in a structure that was built on what you built. Not one day." She stepped back. She turned and walked to Daniel and picked up the briefcase and said, "Let's go." They went. The corridor outside Chambers was empty. The elevator was empty. The lobby was quiet. The security guards at their stations, a few late afternoon visitors moving through the marble space with their own purposes and their own sorrows entirely unconnected to hers. She walked out the door of 60 Center Street and the cold took her immediately, the real cold of a New York November night that had fully arrived while she was inside, and she stood on the steps for a moment and breathed it. Daniel came out beside her. "That was—" he started. "Don't," she said. Not harshly, just not ready. He stopped. Victoria came out a moment later, Clara behind her. The four of them stood on the steps in the cold, and nobody said anything for a moment, which was its own kind of completion. The particular silence of people who have been through something together and are standing on the other side of it and don't have language yet for what it was. Then Victoria said, "Where are you going tonight?" Evelyn thought about that. She thought about Adrian's house in Westchester. She thought about the hotel. She thought about the penthouse, which was still legally her home and which she had no intention of entering until the stay was in writing and served to everyone relevant. "Daniel," she said. He was already on his phone. "I have a hotel, clean reservation, nothing connected to either family name. One night tomorrow we sort the longer arrangement." "Fine," she said. Victoria looked at her. "Clara has your contact information. Monday morning, you need to be at the hearing. Before that, stay somewhere Vincent doesn't know about." She looked at her steadily. "You understand that if you disappear between now and Monday, everything you gave us today becomes significantly weaker." "I know," Victoria said. "I'm not asking you to do this for me," Evelyn said. "I'm asking you to do it because it's the only version of this where you come out the other side of your own choices with anything left." Victoria held her gaze for a moment. Her eyes were still red-rimmed. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than the day. "I'll be there," she said. Evelyn nodded once. A car pulled to the curb. Daniel's arrangements, already moving. She got in, and the door closed, and the city moved past the windows as they drove uptown. And she sat in the back seat with the briefcase on her lap, and both hands pressed flat against it. And she let herself, for the first time since Thanksgiving night, feel the full weight of everything she was carrying. Not the evidence, not the legal strategy, not the hearing on Monday, or the forensic authentication, or the chain of custody documentation that Sujin was already being briefed on for the weekend. All of that was real, and all of it mattered enormously, and she would return to all of it in approximately 8 hours after she had slept. She meant the other weight, the one that didn't have a folder, 2.5 years, a wedding she had believed in, a pregnancy she had wanted, a table she had set with good silverware and crystal glasses on a night she had tried to make into something real, a night she had planned and cooked and lit candles for. And he had sat across from her and eaten and said the apartment looked great, and the whole time the legal framework for her disappearance had been waiting in a filing cabinet somewhere being maintained by attorneys. He paid with money. He had already begun to reclassify as entirely his. She had loved him. She was clear-eyed enough to know that was true, that it had been real on her side regardless of what it was on his, and that the fact of its realness on her side was not stupidity but humanity, and that she was not going to spend one day of her son's life teaching him that love was a form of weakness. She pressed her hand to her side. The baby moved, slow and steady, the way he moved when she was still, oceanic, unhurried, entirely uninterested in the adult world's chaos. She kept her hand there. The hotel was midtown, unremarkable, and the room was clean and quiet and had a window that looked at a brick wall, which was exactly what she needed because she did not want to see the skyline. She sat on the edge of the bed and took off her shoes, and she put the hard drive on the nightstand and she looked at it for a moment. Then she called Adrian. He answered on the second ring. Road noise behind him, the sound of the town car still moving north. "It's done for tonight," she said. "The stay is in. Hearing Monday." A long exhale on his end. "Marcus told me you got out of the hotel before the lawyers arrived." 19 minutes, she said. Your father had a rule about that, Adrian said, about rooms with more than one exit. I know, she said. A pause. The road noise continued. She could picture him in the back of the town car, his white hair, his careful eyes, the folder of documents on the seat beside him. I owe you an accounting, he said, of what I knew and when. I haven't forgotten that. No, she said. You don't get to give me that accounting right now. Right now I need you safe in the Catskills, and I need the documents safe, and I need you at that courthouse Monday. I'll be there. I know you will, she said. She hung up. She lay back on the bed, still dressed, and she stared at the ceiling and she let her body announce everything it had been waiting to say since 11 o'clock the previous night. Her back, her feet, the specific muscular exhaustion of a pregnancy that had been made to carry too much today. The baby shifted and settled and she closed her eyes. She slept for 11 hours. She did not dream. Or if she did not remember it when she woke. Monday morning came gray and cold, the kind of New York December morning that was committed to being difficult about everything. Evelyn arrived at 60 Center Street at 7:30 with Daniel and Sujin and Clara and Adrian, who had driven down from the Catskills at 4 in the morning and looked exactly as tired as that implied and was refusing to acknowledge it. Victoria was already there. She was standing outside the building in a dark coat with a coffee she wasn't drinking, and when she saw Evelyn come up the steps, she straightened slightly, not in deference, but in the way of someone who has made a decision and is committed to the physical posture of it. Evelyn stopped in front of her. You came, she said. I said I would, Victoria said. You did. She looked at her for a moment. Clara has the authentication sequence. Follow her lead in there. I know what I'm doing, Victoria said. I know, Evelyn said. They went inside. The courtroom was not the private chamber. It was a proper hearing room, smaller than a trial courtroom but larger than chambers, with a gallery that held perhaps 40 people. The Moretti legal team was already at their table, Breck and 2 associates, a new face she didn't recognize who had the look of a specialist brought in for something specific. Vincent sat at the end of the table in a dark suit, his posture composed, his hands folded in front of him. He looked at her when she came in. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke. She sat at her table. She opened the briefcase. She placed the hard drive in front of Sujin, who would handle the digital evidence. She placed the original documents, the ones from Adrian's cabinet, the authenticated copies Daniel had prepared over the weekend, in front of Daniel. She placed the photograph of Vincent and Judge Collis beside them as a physical object in the room. She folded her hands and waited. The hearing lasted 4 hours and 12 minutes. It was not dramatic the way things are dramatic in courtrooms on television. It was methodical and precise and conducted in the language of documentation and procedural record, a language designed specifically to remove emotion from the process, so that what remained was only what could be proved. Sujin presented the forensic financial report. She was on the stand for 90 minutes, and she did not flinch once, not when Breck cross-examined, not when the specialist tried to challenge her methodology. She answered everything in the same measured, expert voice, and let the numbers do what numbers do when they are accurate. Daniel presented the trust documentation, the Whitmore secondary provisions, the activation mechanism, the clause naming Evelyn Whitmore, not Evelyn Moretti, as the authority in the event of a primary trustee's breach. He walked through it with the quiet certainty of a man who had read this document many times over the weekend and knew it better than he knew his own. Victoria testified. She was on the stand for 40 minutes. She answered the questions directly, without embellishment, without the kind of careful hedging that signals someone constructing a story rather than recounting one. Breck was aggressive on cross-examination. He challenged her credibility, her motives, her prior involvement in the scheme she was now testifying against. She acknowledged every piece of it. She said, yes, I was involved. She said, yes, I understood what was being planned. She said, yes, I did not stop it when I could have. Her voice did not break. It came close once, when she described the meeting where Vincent had explained the psychiatric petition, the specific language he had used, and then she brought it back and kept going. Evelyn watched the judge. She had learned over the course of the last 72 hours to read Helen Nakamura's attention, the quality of it, the places it sharpened. When the judge was simply processing information, and when she was encountering something that registered as significant. She watched the judge's pencil slow during Victoria's description of the physician meeting. She watched her write 3 lines rather than her usual one. She watched her look at the photograph of Vincent and Judge Collis with the particular stillness of someone absorbing the specific implications of what they were seeing. At 11:47, Judge Nakamura called a 15-minute recess. Evelyn sat at the table and did not talk to anyone. Daniel brought her a glass of water. She drank it. She put her hand on her stomach because the baby was moving with unusual energy this morning, as if he had been paying attention and had opinions. She looked across the room at Vincent. He was speaking quietly with Breck, his head close, one hand on the table, the controlled intensity of a man running options. Breck was saying something, and Vincent was listening, but his eyes were moving, scanning, the way they always moved when he was in a room and assessing it. He scanned the gallery. He scanned the judge's bench. He scanned the evidence tables. He did not scan her. She understood that was a choice. The judge returned. The recess had been 12 minutes, not 15. "I've reviewed the evidence presented this morning alongside the materials submitted on Friday," Judge Nakamura said. "I have several findings." She did not look up from her notes. She was reading them, which meant she had written them during the recess, which meant she had gone into that recess with a direction and used the time to document it rather than to decide it. She had already decided before the recess. Evelyn understood this and let her hands remain still on the table. "First," the judge said, "the emergency stay issued Friday is confirmed and extended pending the full evidentiary review, which I am referring to the trust court with a recommendation for priority processing. The forensic financial evidence is sufficient to establish probable cause for fraud under the relevant statutes, and I am referring that material to the district attorney's office for review." Breck said something. The judge's eyes moved to him and he stopped. "Second," she said, "the psychiatric petition filed by Vincent Moretti on Friday afternoon is dismissed with prejudice. The supporting documentation has been found to be procedurally irregular, and the prearranged nature of the evaluation, as established by witness testimony today, renders the petition without legal standing. The Collis order is vacated." She paused. "I will note for the record that the circumstances surrounding Judge Collis's involvement in this matter have been referred to the appropriate oversight body. That process is separate from and does not affect these proceedings." She turned a page. "Third, with respect to the Whitmore Family Trust provisions, I find that the documentation presented today establishes a credible basis for the activation of the secondary authority clause naming Evelyn Whitmore as the acting trustee pending full resolution. This is not a final determination of trust authority that belongs to the trust court, but it is an interim finding, and it means that no action taken under the primary trustee authority of Vincent Moretti will be recognized by this court as valid until the trust court has ruled." She set down her pencil. She looked at the room. "I want to say something," she said, "that is not part of the formal record." She paused. "In 22 years on the bench, I have read a significant amount of documentation suggesting that legal mechanisms designed to protect people were being used to harm them. What I reviewed this weekend was among the more systematic examples of that I have encountered." She looked at neither table specifically. She looked at the room as a whole. "The law has processes for this. Those processes are now active. I trust that everyone in this room understands that." She stood. The room stood. She left. The noise that came back into the room after the door closed was the particular sound of something that has been very tightly held being released. Not celebration, not quite, but the pressure differential of people who had been sitting inside extreme tension beginning to breathe normally again. Evelyn sat. She sat for a moment and breathed and let the room exist around her without trying to manage it. Daniel put his hand on the table near hers. Not touching, just present. She was grateful for that. The specific grammar of support that did not require her to respond to it. Across the room, she heard Breck's voice, low and clipped, already in the next conversation with Vincent. She did not listen to the words. She heard the tone, the careful damage control tone, the strategic recalibration. Vincent said something back, equally low, and then there was silence from that side. She made herself look. Vincent was standing now, his team gathered around him, and he was looking at her again. The same look as Friday night, the recognition, the recalculation. But something had shifted in it. It was subtler. It was the look of a man who has been constructing something for years and is in the specific moment of understanding that the construction is not going to survive, and is beginning the internal process of deciding what that means, what he is without it. She did not feel triumph. She was honest enough with herself to note that and to understand what it meant. She had wanted, in the raw parts of Thanksgiving night, to feel something devastating in this direction, to watch him lose and feel the clean satisfaction of an equation resolving. That was not what she felt. She felt something closer to the exhaustion of having carried a very heavy thing a very long way and setting it down, and discovering that the putting down was not the relief she had imagined because the weight had changed her body while she was carrying it, and she would need time to learn to stand differently. Vincent walked toward her. Daniel tensed beside her. She put her hand out slightly. Not a gesture he could see, just a pressure in the air between them. And he did not move. Vincent stopped in front of the table. He was not going to make a scene. She had always known that about him. He was not a man who lost himself publicly. Whatever he was carrying right now was buttoned under the dark suit and the composed face, and it would stay there until he was somewhere private. And then she did not know what it would do, and she was no longer responsible for it. "The attorneys will be in touch," he said. "Yes," she said. "They will." A long moment. He looked at her face, and she looked at his, and there was nothing left to say that was useful, nothing that would give either of them anything. So neither of them said anything, and eventually he turned and walked out of the courtroom with Breck beside him, and the door swung shut behind them, and he was gone. She exhaled. She had not realized she had been holding her breath. The weeks that followed were not clean. Nothing that followed was clean. She had understood, somewhere in the middle of that first night, that she was not building toward a clean ending, that the kind of damage Vincent had done over 4 years did not resolve in a single hearing, that the legal process was going to be long and expensive, and that there would be days when it felt like it was moving backward. She had been right. There were motions and counter-motions. There were weeks when Breck's team filed something new every 2 days, each filing a small act of attrition designed to exhaust her resources and her will. There were depositions that lasted entire days, rooms full of lawyers asking questions about things that had happened years ago, things she had to reconstruct from memory and documents, and the careful notes she had begun keeping on the night of Thanksgiving when she first understood that everything she knew was going to need to be proven. Adrian was there for all of it. He drove down from the Catskills and took a room at the same hotel where she was staying and spent the first 2 weeks going through 30 years of Whitmore family documentation with Sue Jin, building the asset map that would form the foundation of the trust court case. He was slower than he used to be, and he knew it, and he did not mention it except once, when she found him at the hotel desk at 2 a.m. with the documents spread around him, and he looked up and said, "I'm fine. Go back to sleep." She went back to sleep. Daniel filed the trust court case in the second week of December. The process moved faster than any of them had expected. The trust court, once activated with proper documentation and the Superior Court's interim finding, was designed to operate quickly, specifically to prevent the kind of prolonged limbo that benefited bad actors. The 3-trustee panel convened on December 19th. Vincent's compromised trustee had been formally removed following the administrative review that Judge Nakamura's referral had triggered, and a replacement had been appointed by the court. The panel reviewed the forensic report, the documentary evidence, and the witness testimony. They reviewed the Whitmore secondary provisions that Richard Whitmore had written and buried in the trust 22 years ago for exactly this contingency. On December 22nd, they issued their ruling. The Moretti trustee authority was revoked. The assets, accounts, and holdings belonging to the Whitmore family bloodline were placed under independent administration pending formal transfer to Evelyn Whitmore as the designated heir and acting authority under the secondary provisions. Vincent's access to the joint accounts was suspended. His role in the Moretti-adjacent legitimate businesses was reduced to a minority shareholder position governed by an independent board. It was not a total victory. She had understood it wouldn't be. He still had his own money, his own assets, the parts of the organization that had always been purely Moretti rather than Whitmore adjacent. He was not destroyed. She had not set out to destroy him, precisely. She had set out to take back what was hers and to protect her son, and those 2 things had been accomplished. The rest was for the courts to continue. On December 28th at 4:47 in the morning, her water broke. She called Daniel first by accident. His name was above the hospital's in her recent calls. and he answered on the second ring, which told her he had also not been sleeping, and she said, "Wrong number. I'm fine. Call you later," and hung up and called the hospital. The labor lasted 11 hours. Adrian sat in the waiting room for the entire 11 hours with a paperback he did not open. She found this out afterward when the nurse told her, and she was not sure what to do with it except hold it. She named him James Richard Whitmore, not Moretti. She had thought about this for weeks, had discussed it with Daniel, had decided it was her right and her intention, and she had not consulted Vincent on the matter because the courts had been sufficiently clear about the current state of his authority over decisions relating to her son. He was 7 pounds, 4 ounces, and he had dark hair and a face that was, at this early and unformed stage, mostly a face, a human face, soft and novel and clearly itself, not his father's and not hers, just new. She held him in the dim light of the hospital room, and she felt the specific quality of looking at something you cannot believe is real, cannot believe is yours, cannot believe is here, after everything that preceded it. She pressed her cheek against the top of his head. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Spring came in the slow, grudging way of New York springs, the cold giving way millimeter by millimeter, the trees in the park starting tentative and then committing, the city's color shifting from gray to something less certain, more alive. James was 4 months old and had developed opinions about most things, communicated through a vocabulary of sound and expression that Evelyn had learned the way she had always learned difficult things, by paying attention, by being present, by showing up even on the days it was hard to show up. She was running the Whitmore Foundation by then, the legitimate business infrastructure that Richard Whitmore had spent 40 years building, that Vincent had spent 4 years attempting to annex, that was now under her hand and being managed with what her father had always said was the only durable management principle: transparency and competent people given appropriate authority. It was not glamorous work. Most of it was paperwork and meetings and the slow reconstruction of trust, not legal trust, human trust, among the people who had worked inside these businesses for years and had spent the last year watching the ground shift under their feet without knowing why. She held meetings. She answered questions directly. She made decisions and was honest when she made bad ones and corrected them. She was not her father. She was learning what she was. In April, she received the final document from Daniel's office, the formal conclusion of the trust court process, the permanent transfer of Whitmore family authority to Evelyn Whitmore, the dissolution of Vincent Moretti's trustee position in language that was final and unappealable. She read it at her desk in the Whitmore offices, which had been moved from the building Vincent had used to a smaller space in Midtown that she had chosen herself. And she set it down and looked at it for a moment, and then filed it in the cabinet where it belonged. She told no one that day. She went home and fed James and gave him his bath and sat on the floor of his room while he did the slow, concentrated work of discovering his own hands. And she watched him and felt the specific piece of a life that was exactly what it appeared to be. There was a gala in May, a foundation event, the kind her father had held every year, the kind that had continued even through the worst of it, because the foundation's work did not stop because its leadership was in legal crisis. She had reorganized it, made it smaller, more focused, invited fewer people but the right people. Not power for its own sake, but people who were doing things she believed in and wanted to support. She stood at the edge of the room that evening, James with his night nurse at home, the city visible through the tall windows, the room filled with the hum of people who were there because they actually wanted to be there, a more bearable sound than the professional networking of the old events. Adrian found her at the edge of the room, the way he had always found people at the edge of rooms. "How are you?" he said, actually asking. She thought about it. "I'm finding out," she said. He looked at her. "Your father used to say that uncertainty was proof you were paying attention." "He said a lot of things," she said. "He did." Adrian looked out at the room. Most of them were right. She didn't say anything. She stood there beside him and looked at the room and thought about Richard Whitmore, who had built something real and had made mistakes and had tried, in the imperfect way of people who love their children and are also only human, to protect her. She thought about the table she had set on Thanksgiving with the good silverware and the candles, the meal that had been the last moment before she knew what she knew. And she understood now that she did not resent that meal. She did not resent the not knowing that preceded it or the love she had brought to it. She only resented that it had been met with something that did not deserve it. That was Vincent's failure, not hers. She had built something, from nothing, from the ruins of a night that should have destroyed her, from a hard drive pressed to her sternum in a kitchen at midnight while a city went on indifferently outside. She had built something that was real and true and belonged to her and would belong to her son, and she had not built it through fear. She had built it through the same things her father had always said were the only durable materials. Truth, the kind that doesn't simplify. Loyalty, the kind that costs something. And the particular courage of a person who, when handed a phone on Thanksgiving night that could have been set back down, had instead read every word and decided to know. The room applauded something, a speaker finishing a remark she had missed, and the sound filled the space around her, warm and collective. And James was home being safe, and Adrian was beside her, and the empire her father had built was intact and in her hands. And the city outside the windows was the same city that had watched all of it happen and would go on watching, indifferent and blazing and relentlessly alive. She picked up her glass. She did not make a toast. She did not say anything. She took a small sip and looked at the city and let herself stand fully in the life she had chosen to build out of the rubble of the one she had been handed. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was hers.